Hi friends, it's Lisa Hetrick, illustrator for Gina K Designs, and I'm so grateful you could join me today. I have a super fun project. It's a little different, but it is watercolor stamping on YUPO paper. So have you ever used YUPO? It is so fun to say, and I'm kind of giggly just talking about it. So here are some samples of some watercoloring that I've done with my brand new stamp set, Just a Little. And this is the new set, and I'm super excited about this one. Super fun. I've been sharing some other video content and some other samples with this, but I'm going to be using some of these stamps today with this YUPO paper and doing some watercolor stamping and talking a little bit about this technique. So here is the paper that I am using. It's made by Legion. It's called YUPO, and it's been around for a really long time, and a lot of different artists use it for different kinds of things. The paper's not really paper, so it's not so much paper. It's 100% polypropylene, so it's like a plasticky paper. It's used for acrylics, it's used for watercolor, it's used for alcohol inks. It's just kind of a fun medium to do some really interesting techniques on. Here's another sample of YUPO paper that is manufactured or sold through Ranger. So this is a really popular version. It's already pre-cut to 5x7 sheets, and it's easily and readily accessible in many of our online stores and many of the local craft stores. So you can see me here playing with the paper just to kind of show you how flexible it is and that it is made of that polypropylene. It's really smooth. It's got a really smooth texture on both sides. It is kind of an innovative fine art substrate is what they're calling it. It's synthetic, it's tree-free, and it's non-absorbent. So it's going to be kind of fun to do some watercoloring on it because we're going to do some watercolor stamping on a non-absorbent surface. So you can see that I've used some of the dye inks, and I'm going to use dye inks and watercolor markers today on this YUPO paper and use the Just a Little stamp set to kind of create some really super fun, really graphic and bold color graphics. But one of the things I want to mention is that the YUPO paper is, again, non-absorbent, but this stuff does not dry quickly. So if you were going to do this technique with watercolor paper, the paper fibers would absorb the dye inks and the water-based mediums, and it would dry over time. The YUPO paper, everything that you're using sits on the surface, so it takes a lot longer time to dry. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with some watercolor stamping on this YUPO paper. We're going to step through using some dye-based inks and also using some watercolor brush pens. Okay, so I've got my Misty out. I've got two colors from the Gina K Designs lines, my two favorites. I've got some water. I've got some Ecoline brush pens here. You could use any kind of watercolor brush pen for this technique. You could even use your Tombos, but these are the ones I grabbed really quickly. So I am using the Misty because I really want to hold the paper down. I'm going to be using the very large stamp from the Just a Little stamp set, that really large floral explosion piece. It's like my super favorite. And here I'm just going to go ahead and ink up the stamp with some Passionate Pink and some Sweet Mango, and just getting some color down there and adding a little bit of the dye ink. And then I'm going to take my little mister and just hit it with a little bit of water. There's nothing else in that mister but just some water. Now, not too wet, so just a super quick mist. And you can see that it's got that watercolor stamping look, but it's not completely saturated. And that's one of the things we don't want to happen. If you do this technique on YUPO paper and you have a really super wet, saturated feel to it, like I do have kind of up in that corner, it's going to take a little bit longer to dry. So if you've got an overnight, that's fantastic. If you don't and you really want to work to make your card quickly, you definitely want to back off on the water a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take these two leaf images from the stamp set. And I really like these because they're kind of a dense leaf with some really nice graphic lines. So I'm going to take this Ecoline brush pen. I've got the greens and the blues here, and I'm just coloring it right down onto the stamp. It's a wet base medium. Again, you could use your zigs, you could use your the clean color brushes from Zig. You could use your Tombow markers. You just want to use a nice water-based marker and ink it up onto the stamp and then go ahead and wet it. So I've loved this variegation of these two blues. And I'm going to be using it again on the little succulent stamp that's part of the stamp set. So you see me here just inking it up with the Ecoline brush pens, and I'm mixing my colors right on the stamp. And I'm just going to go ahead and stamp that corner and then just kind of stamp off and then stamp off and stamp off and just consistently use that color so I can get a couple different shades of that variegation of color. I didn't wet the stamp before I did this. I did this second one here down in the lower left-hand corner. I did wet the stamp, and you can see it's kind of wet and it's mottled a little bit, and it's kind of blending a little bit more than I probably want it to, but I'm really, really digging the way it looks. So I'm going to go ahead and keep doing this technique with the open line flower from the stamp set. I'm just going to mist it a little bit there and add a little bit of blue. Taking those two colors, that blue and that pink, I was color mixing right from the marker onto the stamp so I could get kind of a purple tone that would really pull out that color that's already from the passionate pink. Just love that. Okay, so I'm having a little bit of fun here, and you can see that this technique it's super shiny. Everything, we weren't working with a lot of water, so it's still not super, super wet, but it is wet. So if I touch it right now, I could booger this up. YUPO paper is super, super popular with stamp artists and paper crafters who use alcohol inks. I am alcohol ink challenged, so I really, really dig using this paper for watercolor projects. I've painted with it. I've also used acrylic inks on it. It's just a really fun paper to create different techniques with. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just taking a piece of white cardstock and putting it on top and just pulling what I call pulling a print of what I have here. So I'm pulling off the excess color onto a piece of cardstock that is absorbent, and I can use that for a project later because I really want to work with this piece of YUPO and this background piece that I've created, but I don't want to smudge it up. So I went ahead and just kind of cut this down a little bit. I have a piece of Gina K Designs black onyx cardstock, and I just love the way I've just created this piece that can be a nice little layering piece for this card. So I'm going to play with this a little bit. I'm also going to show you how easy it is to take the sentiment. So I'm using a sentiment, a little note from the stamp set. I'm inking it up with some passionate pink, and I'm going to go ahead and nest that sentiment right down in that lower right hand corner. Now it's very, very easy to stamp on the YUPO paper. It is a little slippery of a surface because it is super smooth, so you really do have to kind of take your time and be precise. You could use the MISTI for this, or you can go ahead and just free range stamp it in here. Okay, so that lower right hand corner just needs a little something. So I just took the succulent stamp and put it on my fingers, and I'm actually not putting it on a block. I'm just using my fingers as the block. And I added a little bit of the watercolor brush ink and mix that right on the stamp. Just hit it with a little bit of mist of water and just stamp that down. Just love the way this little card base is turning out. So I'm going to set this aside and let this dry a little bit because it is still kind of wet. I'm moving back to that first piece that I had created and shared in the beginning, and I'm going to go ahead and cut this down to like 4 by 5.5 and put this on another piece of Gina K Designs black onyx cardstock and use that as my card base. Okay, so to adhere this, I've got the Bad Mama Jamma adhesive ATG gun out so that I could go ahead and make sure that that thing is sticking onto my card base. And I'm really digging the fact that this stamp set is so super graphic that you can use it to just create a lot of really funky backgrounds. And with a lot of different mediums, you can do a lot of different watercolor techniques and create some really neat graphic backgrounds for your cards. So just a little bit something different. Okay, so I cut a strip of the pink from the other piece of YUPO paper that I shared in the beginning, and I'm going to go ahead, I use my ATG gun again, adhesive gun, to adhere this piece down. I'm going to go ahead and trim off that extra little piece from the right, and just going to go ahead and use that a little note sentiment again with some passionate pink right there on that little strip, and it's just going to add a little bit of tone on tone. Normally I would use black for my sentiments, but I'm just adding a little tone on tone color. I'm really loving this card. It came together so super simple, and it was really just kind of a fun little way to play with creating some backgrounds with watercolor. So I've gone ahead and grabbed some of the black Nuvo drops, and I'm just going to add a couple little drops here and there on this card base to add a little bit of dimension, but really low profile, and just again pulling that black cardstock color to the front a little bit. And I am digging the way this came out. I love the color. I love how the watercolor just kind of bled. It got a little bit of mottled here and there, and it's just a really fun paper to play with. So here's another look at the backgrounds that I created with the dye inks and the watercolor brush pens and the Just a Little stamp set. And I'm super excited about these. They're really easy. They came together really easy. They're big and bold, graphic, and a ton of fun to create. So I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.